North Korea versus South Korea, a clash of strengths and strategies. The Korean Peninsula is one of the most heavily fortified regions in the world, and comparing North Korea and South Korea militarily is like comparing raw power versus refined precision. On one side, North Korea relies on sheer numbers, overwhelming artillery, and the threat of nuclear weapons. On the other, South Korea wields advanced technology, economic strength, and powerful alliances. So, if war broke out, how would these two rivals clash? Let's unpack it. 1. North Korea's strengths: quantity over quality. When we talk about North Korea's military, one word comes to mind: massive. They've got over 1 million active soldiers and one of the largest artillery arsenals in the world. Imagine this: tens of thousands of artillery pieces and rocket launchers are parked just across the DMZ, all aimed at Seoul. That's North Korea's ace in the hole, an overwhelming barrage that could devastate the South's population and infrastructure within hours. But here's the catch: a lot of this equipment is old, like Soviet-era old. They're tanks, models like the T-55 and T-62 that were cutting-edge during the Cold War. Against South Korea's K-2 Black Panther tanks, these are almost laughable. The same goes for their Air Force. MiG-21 and MiG-23 fighters simply don't stand a chance against modern stealth aircraft like the F-35. Yet it's not just about the hardware. North Korea also has 200,000 special forces, and these aren't your average troops. These soldiers are trained for guerrilla tactics, infiltration, and sabotage. Picture this: during a war, they'd sneak across the border, attack supply lines, power stations, or even airports, sowing chaos while the main fight rages on. 2. South Korea's strengths: modern and advanced. Now let's switch gears to South Korea. If North Korea is all about quantity, South Korea is all about quality. Their military isn't the biggest, but it's packed with modern technology and backed by some serious firepower. Take their tanks, for example. The K-2 Black Panther isn't just a tank, it's a technological marvel. It's got an advanced targeting system that can hit a moving target miles away, and active protection systems that can intercept incoming missiles. If North Korean tanks rolled south, the K-2s would cut through them like butter. But South Korea's biggest advantage is in the air. Their F-35 stealth fighters can fly undetected into enemy territory, knock out key targets, and return before anyone even knows they're there. In contrast, North Korea's aging MiGs wouldn't last long in a dogfight. South Korea's Air Force would likely achieve air superiority within days, if not hours. And here's the kicker: missile defense. North Korea loves to show off its missile tests, but South Korea has spent years building a layered missile defense system. They've got the THAAD system, which can shoot down missiles in their terminal phase, and the Patriot PAC-3, which handles shorter-range threats. While no system is perfect, these defenses mean North Korea's missile barrage wouldn't be nearly as devastating as they'd hope. 3. The real battlefield: geography and strategy. Let's talk about where this fight would actually happen: the Korean Peninsula. The geography here is a nightmare for South Korea. The capital, Seoul, is just 35 miles from the DMZ. That's less than an hour's drive. This proximity makes it incredibly vulnerable to North Korea's artillery. Even with modern missile defenses, you can't shoot down artillery shells, so Seoul would take heavy damage in the early hours of any war. It's not a question of if, but how much. On the flip side, geography works against North Korea when it comes to logistics. Their infrastructure is underdeveloped, and they don't have the fuel reserves or transportation networks to support a prolonged campaign. Once their initial stockpile of supplies runs out, their offensive would grind to a halt. South Korea, meanwhile, has an ultra-modern infrastructure: highways, railways, and supply chains that can keep their war machine running indefinitely. The opening moves: shock and awe. If war broke out, North Korea would aim for a fast and brutal opening. They'd launch artillery barrages and missile strikes aimed at crippling South Korea's military bases, command centers, and of course, Seoul. Their goal? to inflict so much damage that South Korea and its allies would hesitate to escalate the conflict. But here's where South Korea has the edge. Within hours of the initial assault, they'd likely deploy their air force to neutralize North Korea's artillery positions and missile launchers. This is where their F-35s and K-9 Thunder self-propelled howitzers come into play. The K-9, by the way, is a beast. It's fast, accurate, and has longer range than most of North Korea's artillery. Once South Korea starts hitting back, North Korea's old exposed equipment would quickly become a liability. The nuclear wild card. Of course, we can't ignore the elephant in the room: nuclear weapons. North Korea has them, South Korea doesn't. If Kim Jong-un feels backed into a corner, he might gamble on using nukes, either as a direct strike or as a form of blackmail to force negotiations. The problem for North Korea is that a nuclear attack would invite total annihilation. The US has made it clear that any nuclear strike would trigger a devastating response, likely ending the Kim regime. The final outcome: who wins? So, who comes out on top? In a conventional war, South Korea's superior technology, infrastructure, and alliances give it a decisive edge. They'd likely neutralize North Korea's artillery and missile sites, achieve air superiority, and cripple the North's logistics within weeks. But here's the tragic reality: there are no winners in a Korean war. Even if South Korea wins militarily, the human and economic cost would be catastrophic. Millions of lives would be lost, Seoul would be in ruins, and the global economy would take a massive hit. Final thought: South Korea's modernization and alliances make it the likely victor, but North Korea's unpredictability and the sheer destruction it can unleash means any war would be a disaster for everyone involved. What do you think? Could North Korea's unconventional tactics turn the tide, or is South Korea's high-tech military too much to overcome? Let us know.